I never thought that catching my own son-in-law in my living room would end up being the proof I needed to take him down for real estate fraud. The moment I walked in and saw Darius showing strangers through my living room without my consent, I froze until he turned and shouted, "You should be in a nursing home anyway, you're useless." And I, calm as thunder, said, "You'll rot in prison," right there in my own home on Beatty's Ford Road last Tuesday, while the buyer stared at the forged listing agreement still clutched in his hand, and my Nest camera recorded every word, which my neighbor Tanisha later helped me download. He had a polo shirt tucked in like a damn agent, walking those people through my space like he owned it. One woman even asked if the fireplace worked. I still had a pan of greens cooling on the stove. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I told the buyers this was my home, not for sale, never listed, and the man showing it to them was impersonating an authorized seller. They left quickly, confused and apologetic. Darius had the gall to stay and say it was a miscommunication. Then he stormed out, still gripping that fake paper, muttering something about making it right. I locked the door behind him and turned the deadbolt twice. Tanisha came over not long after. She'd seen the strangers from her front porch. I had her help me pull the Nest footage right then and there, got it saved onto a thumb drive and a backup folder on my email. She even helped me write down a timeline while it was fresh. I kept that list next to my bills under the fruit bowl, right where one wouldn't forget it. I didn't sleep that night. I made coffee at 2 a.m. and sat at the kitchen table looking at the thumbnail of Darius yelling in my house. I could see my name in the corner of the screen. I thought of all the Sundays I fed that boy, all the times he called me Mama G. Then I opened a new notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. "This ends with handcuffs." My name is Gloria Renee Mitchell. I'm 64. I've owned this house outright since 1998, and if you'd asked me a month ago, I would have told you my son-in-law was decent. But that changed fast once my daughter got sick and he thought I was too old to notice the walls closing in. I still remember the day Darius first offered to help me organize the house paperwork, standing in my driveway with 2 grocery bags like he was some kind of savior. Nina had just come home from her second hospital stay in 6 weeks, and I was too tired to argue. He sat at my dining room table with his little laptop, asking to review the deed, the tax statements, the insurance policy. I let him. That's what makes me sick. I let him, because I thought we were surviving something together. I didn't know he'd already started carving me out of the life I built. He started small, suggested I consolidate accounts, use his address as a backup for lost mail, and assured me he'd track any bills while I focused on Nina. It sounded helpful, until bills stopped showing up altogether. I didn't notice at first. I was driving Nina to treatments, watching her hands shake while she tried to hide her pain, praying over every lab result. Darius kept smiling, kept showing up with receipts I never asked for. What caught my attention wasn't a bill, it was a silence. The mailbox stayed empty. The kitchen calendar had no due dates. When I asked him if the city had changed the tax schedule, he brushed it off. "They're all online now," he said. "I'll send you the links." He never did. The truth was, I wasn't just missing mail. I was being erased, one document at a time. And the worst part? I kept thanking him for picking up prescriptions, for handling the new roof estimate, for being the man I thought I could lean on. I didn't realize he was setting me up to fall, so he could be the one to walk away with everything I'd spent 40 years holding together. First, he lost my mail for weeks, then got snippy when I asked about my own property taxes. But the final straw came when he filed a change of address form behind my back and intercepted my escrow documents from the bank. Proof I found crumpled in his glove compartment. I only looked in his car because he asked me to grab his phone charger. I didn't want to, but Nina was asleep inside, and he was in the backyard, fake smiling at the neighbors like he hadn't just told me to relax and let the men handle things. I opened the glove box expecting wires or gum. What I found was a stack of mail rubber banded together, every envelope with my name on it. One had a bank logo I recognized from my mortgage refinance. Another was slit open, folded sloppily like he'd read it in a rush. The return address on the top letters stopped me cold. Escrow Division, final notice. He hadn't just been hiding bills, he'd redirected them to himself. I took photos with my flip phone before I put everything back the way I found it. He couldn't know I knew. Not yet. That night, I went online from Tanisha's place and pulled up the USPS mail forwarding site. It confirmed what I feared. A change request had been submitted 2 months ago, redirecting everything to a P.O. box listed under his name. That's when my stomach dropped. I wasn't just being shut out. He'd built a whole system to make sure I stayed confused, off balance, too slow to react until it was too late. I didn't sleep again. Not because of fear, but fury. Nina deserved better. I deserved better. I printed out the USPS confirmation, slipped it into my manila folder, and wrote the time and date next to it in red pen. That's when the part of me that raised a daughter on one salary and no help came back online. If Darius wanted to play executive with my life, he was about to meet the Department of Consequences. I told my friend Yolanda from the choir what happened over pound cake at New Hope AME, and she didn't blink before offering to call her niece, an attorney with a spine and a state license, who had handled a guardianship case just like this one last fall. We were in the fellowship hall, sitting near the back where the air vent rattles. I hadn't meant to say anything. I'd brought the cake like always, and planned to keep my mouth shut, pretend I was just tired, not being stolen from. But when she asked how Nina was doing, my voice cracked. I told her about the mail, the fake address, the bank notice I found. I didn't even finish the story before she reached into her purse and handed me a sticky note with a name and number already written on it. Patrice Coleman, attorney at law. Yolanda said, "She doesn't flinch. That girl pulled a cousin out of a crooked guardianship in Rowan County in under 2 weeks." It was the first time I didn't feel crazy. Yolanda didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't suggest I give Darius the benefit of the doubt. She just cut me another slice of cake and told me to keep records. That moment steadied me more than any sermon I'd heard in a year. I knew what Darius was doing now wasn't just manipulation. It was theft. Legal-looking, polite-sounding theft. The kind that ruins black women quietly, without fingerprints. When I got home, I called Patrice. Her assistant answered, took down the dates and details, and scheduled a callback for the next morning. I wrote everything in my notebook. Time of call, name of assistant, what I said. The file was starting to grow. And for the first time, I felt the fear in Darius' eyes that day wasn't about me catching him. It was about what would happen if I ever stopped being scared of what he might do next. That was the night I moved the manila folder from the drawer to the kitchen counter, right where I make my coffee. It was no longer for storage. It was now evidence. I trusted Darius because he married my only child, Nina, and when she was in and out of the hospital with lupus, I let him handle the mortgage appraisals, the $6,300 roof repair, and even added him as an emergency contact on the deed. Not because I'm naive, but because I believed we were family. I remember the afternoon we made that update. Nina had just come out of her first major flare, and Darius drove us to the records office with his hand on her back like he was steadying the both of us. He said it was just for safety, in case anything happened and decisions needed to be made quickly. He used words like streamlining and trusted point of contact. He smiled, and I signed, not knowing I'd handed him the very tools he'd used to try to sell the floor from under my feet. He kept the tone light after that, called me Queen G, brought dinner sometimes, offered to help sort the attic. Looking back, every offer had a clock behind it. If he wasn't rushing me to sign, he was distracting me with Nina's labs or dropping hints about downsizing. Once, he asked what my funeral plans were. Said it so casually while watching the game that I thought I misheard. I changed the subject. That was my mistake. Nina never saw it, not fully. She'd been so sick, so tired, her focus narrowed, to just making it to the next treatment. I didn't blame her. I blamed him. He weaponized her illness, used her absence from conversations to reshape the narrative. And when I tried to ask questions, he played the worried son-in-law. "You've got a lot on your plate, Mama G," he'd say. "Let me carry some of it." And I let him. The truth is, I knew better. I'd raised a child alone after my husband died at 42. I'd fought off debt collectors, held down a school secretary job for 29 years, and cooked for the entire block after Sunday service. But love makes fools out of even the sharpest women. That's what Darius counted on. The first red flag was when he got cagey about a notary visit. Said he'd, quote, take care of it himself. But I didn't press it, since I was more worried about Nina's treatment bills at Atrium, and I didn't want to cause more stress. It was early August, hot enough that the air conditioner barely kept up. Darius said he needed something notarized for the insurance claim on the roof, just a routine form. I offered to come with him, told him where I usually go, Ms. Lopez at the UPS on Freedom Drive, a woman I've trusted for years. He waved it off, said it was already handled. Took care of it on my lunch break. No need to drag me around. The smile he gave was too quick, too smooth, like someone who'd rehearsed the exact answer for a lie I hadn't asked yet. A week later, I asked him for a copy, just to keep with the file. He said he'd lost it. That made no sense. Darius didn't lose documents. He hoarded them. Color-coded folders, plastic sleeves, even labeled flash drives. That's when my gut tightened. But I let it go. Nina had just finished a 5-hour infusion, and I wasn't about to start a household fight while she was curled up on the couch, barely holding down broth. I told myself I was imagining things. I even apologized when he got short with me, like I was the one pushing too hard. But that night, I pulled out the home file anyway. Every receipt, policy, and letter I had spread across the kitchen table. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to feel the weight of what was mine. And when I saw the original copy of the deed, the clean signature, the date I filed it, I felt something settle in my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't old and confused. I was being played. I stayed up organizing the papers into categories: property, health, financial, legal. I labeled each section in black marker. I wasn't sure what Darius had done yet, but I knew what he'd touched, and that was enough to start drawing lines around it. 2 weeks later, I noticed a coming soon real estate sign leaning against his trunk, and when I asked about it, he laughed and said it was for one of his clients. But he fumbled when I asked why my address was on the rider. I was walking to the trash bins when I spotted it. White frame, clean print, plastic still clinging to the edges like it had just been unboxed. I thought maybe it belonged to a neighbor. But when I got closer, I saw the address on the bottom strip in red font, 3417 Beatty's Ford Road, my house. I stood there for a moment, the bag of garbage sweating in my hand, staring at it like it might blink and correct itself. Darius came out the side door like nothing was wrong, whistling. I asked him about the sign straight out. He didn't stutter, just said he was helping a friend in real estate, said I'd laugh if I knew the full story. But when I pointed at the rider with my address printed clear as day, his face changed. It was just a flicker, barely a second, but I've seen that look before, from parents at school caught lying about absences, from men in pews pretending they weren't the reason someone cried through the benediction. It was guilt slipping through control. He picked up the sign and slid it into his trunk like it was nothing, called over his shoulder that it must have gotten mixed up. I nodded like I believed him, but inside, something snapped. A line had been crossed. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was strategy. A slow grind to move me out before I noticed. He wanted me to doubt my own address, get used to seeing it detached from my control. I went inside and added a new tab to my notebook, physical evidence. I described the sign, noted the time, and wrote down the license plate of the white Corolla parked behind his. If he was bold enough to put the sign together, he was bold enough to have taken the next step. I just hadn't found it yet. When I went to check the title at the county clerk's office on October 4th, the clerk looked uncomfortable and printed out a transfer form I'd supposedly signed, dated September 18th, and notarized in Raleigh, a city I haven't stepped foot in since 2003. It was a gray hallway, tile floors that echoed, and a line of people who looked just as tired as I felt. I didn't tell anyone why I was there. I just handed over my ID and asked for the current deed on file for my property. The clerk, young, polite, tapped her keyboard, then frowned. Said there's a recent transfer on file. I asked her to print it. She hesitated like she was waiting for me to say it wasn't possible. I didn't blink. When she handed me the copy, my hands didn't even shake. I read every line, each more offensive than the last. A full title transfer, signed by me, notarized in Wake County, submitted by someone with an address I didn't recognize. The notary's name was unfamiliar. The signature looked like mine if you tilted your head and squinted. The handwriting was smooth, practiced, but the L in Mitchell curled wrong. I always make it sharp. This one looped like a child's. I asked the clerk how something like that gets filed without my knowledge. She said as long as the form is signed and notarized, they don't verify identity. Just process it. She didn't say sorry, I didn't need her to. I folded the copy, slid it into my purse, and walked out steady. I called Tanisha from the parking lot, told her I needed a witness. Then I called Patrice and left a voicemail. There's a forged deed with my name on it. I have the proof. I sat in my car with the engine off for a full hour, watching people come and go, wondering how many women had been erased the same way, quietly, with no warning. No knock at the door, just a line of ink and a fake signature in a courthouse filing cabinet. I promised myself I'd never let that stand. When I confronted him with the paper, he smirked and told Nina I was slipping mentally and maybe it was time for assisted living talk, which made her go quiet, and I could see the shame rising in her face even as she looked away. I waited until we were all sitting in the living room. Nina had just finished a treatment the day before and was curled under the throw blanket with her tea. I handed Darius the printed deed, didn't say a word, just watched his face as he read it. He didn't even pretend to be shocked. Instead, he leaned back on the couch like I'd handed him a grocery list and said, "You probably forgot you signed it, Mama G. It's been a stressful few months." I kept my eyes on Nina. She blinked twice but didn't say anything. Then he added it, casually, almost like a joke. "Maybe we need to have a talk about long-term care options. Don't want anything slipping through the cracks." He glanced at her like he expected a laugh. She didn't give him one. I stood up and said, "I haven't been to Raleigh in 20 years, and I sure as hell didn't sign over my house while you were out buying yard signs." His face tightened. Not anger, calculation. He wasn't used to being called out in front of her. Nina looked down at her tea, said nothing. That silence was worse than shouting. I knew she was exhausted, but part of her was afraid too. Afraid I might be right. Afraid she might have backed the wrong horse. He'd been feeding her the same story for weeks, framing me as forgetful, overwhelmed, needing help. I saw it now. He'd planted that idea like a seed and watered it every time I asked too many questions. I went to my room, shut the door, and typed everything that happened into a new document. Word for word. Date. Time. Tone. I backed it up twice. One to the cloud, one to a flash drive I slipped behind the old family Bible in my drawer. He wanted to make me look unstable. I was about to show him what steady looks like. That night, I sat in my bedroom, lit by nothing but my brass lamp and resolve, and I opened the manila folder where I'd kept every tax bill, title, insurance payment, and screenshot since the day I paid off the house. Then I called Yolanda's niece, attorney Patrice Coleman. I didn't care that it was 10:47 p.m. Her card said 24-hour voicemail accepted. I gave her everything in one long breath. My name, address, the forged transfer, the notary from Raleigh, the fake listing, even the nest footage. I said, "I'm not confused. I'm not unstable. I'm being robbed by a man who thinks a 64-year-old black woman won't fight." Then I hung up and set the phone down without shaking. The folder had grown fat. I spread everything out across the bed. Yellowed receipts from roof repairs, my notarized will, screenshots of the USPS address change. I even pulled out the old Polaroid of me holding the keys the day I paid the house off in, 98, standing in the front yard, grinning, sweat-darkened blouse sticking to my back. That picture wasn't for nostalgia. It was a timestamp, a record of possession, a line in the dirt. I used sticky tabs to mark each piece. Ownership, fraud, mail interference, forgery. I labeled a fresh folder, legal, left space for what Patrice would send. I copied every document to a USB and put it inside a Ziploc bag with the flash drive from Tanisha's camera footage. If Darius wanted war, I was coming with files, timestamps, and a witness list. I slept with the folder at the foot of my bed. Not because I was afraid he'd come for it, but because it reminded me who I am. I've survived layoffs, medical debt, Nina's lupus diagnosis, and the slow heartbreak of watching a child trust the wrong man. This was just a new battle in a war. One was raised to win. By morning, Patrice had returned my call. Her voicemail was calm and sharp. "Gloria, I'm on it. Let's set up a call today. And don't sign or shred a thing." By Thursday, Patrice had filed a cease and desist, emailed the brokerage using the MLS listing number Darius had submitted, and sent certified letters to revoke his power of attorney and cancel every pending contract he'd initiated in my name. I spent the day in my house robe, pacing between the printer and the kitchen sink, feeding paper into the tray and waiting for that satisfying click when the green light blinked complete. Patrice didn't waste time. She drafted the documents herself, tight, formal, and clear as glass. Every line made it plain. Darius had no legal authority to represent me, and any broker or agent continuing to process a listing on 3417 Beatty's Ford would be complicit in fraud. The brokerage call was the most satisfying part. Patrice looped me in on speaker. The woman on the other end started with politeness, then shifted to worry once Patrice mentioned the forged notary seal and the unauthorized deed transfer. By the time Patrice cited the statute on criminal impersonation in property transactions, the woman said, "We'll be freezing all activity on the file until this is resolved." Just like that, his pretend sale went cold. The certified letters went out before noon, one to the brokerage, one to Darius, one to the notary agency in Raleigh, and one to the county register of deeds. Patrice made sure each was trackable, with delivery confirmation required. I paid for the stamps myself, cash from the blue tin I keep in the pantry behind the flour. It felt good to spend it on something that burned back. By 3 o'clock, we had confirmation from USPS that all 4 letters had been accepted. Patrice texted me a copy of the receipt for my records. I printed it and added it to the legal tab. Darius had forged his way into control. I was clawing it back, one sealed envelope at a time. That evening, I put on lipstick for the first time in weeks. I wasn't going anywhere. I just needed to see myself looking like someone you don't lie to twice. I backed up every receipt to the cloud, printed 3 binders worth of documents, including the forged notary stamp, and even saved the voicemail where he threatened to move me out one way or another, time-stamped at 9:47 p.m. on October 2nd. The voice recording shook me more than I expected. It didn't come in anger. No yelling, no cursing. Just Darius, calm as ice, telling someone on the phone, probably his brother, that she's too attached to that house, and that he'd get her out one way or another. That phrase echoed, not because it was violent, but because it was confident. He thought I was already beat. I uploaded that file to 3 places: my email, Patrice's secure folder, and a password-protected drive labeled Fraud Evidence 3417. I wrote the name in capital letters, just to remind myself it wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. I wasn't a woman scorned. I was a homeowner under attack, assembling the case like a prosecution team. The binders weren't for theatrics. Patrice said paper hits harder than pixels in court. I used dividers, page protectors, even printed out photos of the for sale sign Darius tried to stash. Section 1, Ownership History. Section 2, Mail tampering and change of address confirmation. Section 3, Unauthorized listing screenshots, brokerage correspondence. Section 4, Voice recordings and transcripts. Every item dated, labeled, and cross-referenced. I even printed the call log from Nina's phone the night Darius accused me of mental decline. He called her 3 times after I left the room. I didn't read the texts, but the timing told the story. He was running damage control while I sat in bed highlighting the deed with a red Sharpie. It took me 4 hours to finish, but when I zipped the binders shut and stacked them on the kitchen table, I felt taller. Not safer. He was still in our lives, still circling, but steadier. Like if I went down, it wouldn't be quietly. There'd be a trail behind me loud enough for any judge to follow. The next step was clear: move from defense to offense. And I wasn't moving alone. Tanisha reviewed the security footage. Patrice subpoenaed the notary log from Raleigh, and Pastor Jameson agreed to witness our family meeting if Darius tried to deny it. All while Nina quietly emailed me her medical directives to keep in a folder marked Mom Only. The footage showed more than I remembered. Darius unlocking the front door with a spare key I never gave him, leading that young couple room to room like he was the listing agent. At one point, he even motioned toward my bedroom and said, "This will be cleared out by next week." Tanisha paused the video and let out a breath like a punch. That's not confidence. "That's calculation," she said. We downloaded the clips to 2 drives and emailed one to Patrice. Another nail in the plan he swore would stay invisible. Patrice was already 3 steps ahead. She filed a subpoena for the Raleigh Notary's official journal, which every licensed notary in North Carolina is required to keep. If my name showed up on an entry for a city I haven't visited in 2 decades, that would be proof of fraud, clean state-documented fraud. She also requested the notary's official seal and signature card, said she'd seen forged notary work unravel cases before, and this one was full of threads ready to pull. I met with Pastor Jameson in his office that Friday afternoon. He listened without interruption, then said, "I'll be there." Not because he wanted to play judge, but because Darius wouldn't be able to lie so easily with someone he still pretended to impress watching. The pastor had known Nina since youth choir. He baptized her. That meant something. To her. To me. Maybe even to Darius, though less by faith and more by optics. Later that evening, Nina forwarded me her advance directives. No explanation, just a quiet shift. It was her way of saying, "I see what's happening now." She didn't pick sides out loud, but that folder labeled Mom Only did more for me than any apology could. One by one, the pieces were lining up. Not out of loyalty, out of truth. And truth was enough. We drafted a notarized letter revoking any previous permissions, added a trespassing notice with Charlotte PD, and made it plain that if Darius contacted me or approached the property again, the police and bank fraud unit would be notified with full documentation. It wasn't a threat, it was protection. Patrice said, "We're done warning him." She brought the draft to my house herself, went over every word at my kitchen table. The letter was direct. All former permissions, powers of attorney, verbal or written agreements involving the house or my finances were null as of that date. Signed by me, notarized by someone Patrice knew personally, filed with the clerk the same afternoon. Patrice even had 2 copies stamped on the spot, one for my records, one for law enforcement. Then we called in the trespassing report. The officer who showed up was young, polite, but looked unsure until Patrice introduced herself and handed him the binder tabbed Interference and Threats. His tone changed. He took the call seriously, said it would be entered into the system, and if Darius so much as stepped onto the lawn again, I could call 911 without question. I walked the officer through the Ring camera coverage and pointed out the new lock on the back gate. He nodded, said, "You've done everything right." That night, I typed up a notice and taped it inside the storm door. Private property, no trespassing, under legal protection. I didn't care if it looked aggressive. Let the mail carrier read it. Let the neighbors talk. I was done being quiet while someone plotted my erasure from the inside out. Tanisha helped me laminate the copy. We staked a second sign into the flower bed, right next to the begonias Nina planted in the spring. I looked at that plastic post sticking out of my garden and thought, this is what it's come to. A border drawn in a front yard. But borders matter. And this one had my name on it, signed in black ink, filed, witnessed, legal. When he got the lawyer's letter on his doorstep the following week, he stormed into Nina's rehab clinic blaming manipulation and threatening lawsuits. But the receptionist had already been briefed and handed him the visitor restriction notice with firm eyes. He walked in like he still ran the show, shoulders squared, loud enough for the whole waiting room to hear. "Where's Nina? I need to talk to my wife." He had the envelope in his hand, the corner torn open like he'd read it 3 times, and still couldn't believe he wasn't the center of gravity anymore. But Patrice had called ahead. The clinic staff was ready. No raised voices, no scene, just procedure. The receptionist stood, calm and flat-toned. "You've been placed on a restricted list per patient request. You can leave a message, but you cannot enter without her written consent." He called it a setup. Said Nina was being fed poison by people who never built anything. But the staff didn't flinch. Security stood up behind the counter like it was nothing new. Darius backed off eventually, but not before tossing the letter onto the floor and calling Nina a damaged little puppet. Someone gasped. I hoped it was loud enough for him to hear how far he'd slipped. Nina called me that evening, didn't cry, didn't ask me what to do. She just said he made a fool of himself, and I didn't even blink. That's when I knew the leash he'd been pulling on was finally frayed. I added the incident to the binder. Clinic name, time of arrival, witness names, and a screenshot of the visitor restriction form they faxed to Patrice that same day. That file was thick now, Not from anger, but from action. Darius had come to reclaim control, with noise and swagger. He left with a closed door and no legal ground to stand on. We held a sit-down at New Hope's Community Hall that Sunday after service. Patrice at one end, me at the other, and Darius sweating in the middle as the room filled with folks he didn't think would care, including Pastor Jameson and 3 neighbors who'd seen him unloading yard signs. He came dressed like it was a job interview. Pressed shirt, clean shave, fake humility dripping off every word. "I think this whole thing's been blown out of proportion," he started, trying to control the room before we even opened the folder. "But this wasn't his house, and it wasn't his audience. It was mine." And Patrice came with copies. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. She laid out documents like cards on a table. Forged signature. False notary stamp. Change of address confirmation. Photos of the real estate sign in his trunk. She passed them around like hymnals. The silence grew thick. Darius kept glancing at Nina, hoping she'd step in. She didn't. She sat beside Pastor Jameson, still, arms crossed. Her face was pale, but firm. Then came the best part. "Mr. Hayes from across the street speaking up. Saw you with those signs in August. Figured you had Gloria's blessing." That cracked the illusion. Darius laughed once, short and bitter, then muttered something about miscommunication. Patrice just raised her hand like a traffic officer and said, "Miscommunication doesn't sign legal documents in a city the homeowner hasn't visited in 2 decades. He stopped talking. I looked him dead in the face and said, "You thought I was tired. That I'd fold. You forgot who raised Nina. You forgot who survived losing a husband, raising a child, and keeping a roof up when the bank wanted it down. You miscalculated." By the time we left, nobody was confused about what he'd done. That room didn't owe me anything, but they gave me their quiet witness. That's sometimes more powerful than shouting. And when Patrice handed Darius a formal invitation to respond, legal language, deadline included, he didn't even open it, just held it like it might burn. Patrice laid out the title history, emails, forged notary log, video and call recordings in front of the group, and when she said, "This is attempted grand larceny, plain and provable," even Darius' voice cracked as the pastor crossed his arms in silence. He tried to pivot, said I'd given verbal consent, that I didn't remember all the conversations, that he was only trying to streamline the estate. But with each lie, Patrice had a counter, paper in hand, time-stamped. The fake notary's journal from Raleigh? Blank on the date, he claimed. The listing submission? Traced to his IP address. The voicemail where he threatened to "get me out one way or another," played in full, speaker on the table. He didn't deny the voice. Couldn't. I watched his posture change. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The shoulders sagged, jaw stopped clenching, the eyes went still. That's when it hit him. He was exposed. Not just in theory, but in process. Legal, criminal, reputational. He turned to Nina, reached for something. Apology, maybe? Damage control. But she shook her head. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just done. The room didn't erupt. That's what made it worse for him. No one argued. No one came to his defense. They just sat, watched, took it in. Darius had always relied on charm. But charm doesn't survive documentation. When Pastor Jameson finally spoke, it was one line. "This is shameful." And that landed harder than anything Patrice or I could have said. As the meeting ended, he didn't even make eye contact. He left the manila envelope on the table, unopened, and walked out alone. The sheriff served him with fraud charges the next morning. His brokerage cut ties that afternoon, and by Friday I had changed the locks, added a Ring camera, filed for full title protection, and hung my father's old house key above the mantel where it belongs. The deputy knocked just after 8. Calm, by the book. He handed me a copy of the notice too, clean, official, with Darius, full name in bold. I didn't smile. I nodded, thanked him, closed the door, and exhaled. Patrice called 10 minutes later. "It's moving," she said. "Let it." That same day, his brokerage emailed a formal disavowal. They'd terminated all association and were cooperating fully. A cut and run, sure, but it was one less tool in his box. He'd lost the illusion of professionalism. All that was left now was liability. By week's end, every lock on my house had been replaced. Front, back, even the old shed he used to sneak tools from. The new key was solid brass, heavy in the hand. The locksmith offered to dispose of the old ones. I said no. I kept one. Nailed it right above the fireplace, beside the photo of my daddy in his overalls, standing in front of this same house 60 years ago. That wasn't nostalgia. It was ownership.